Welcome to my thought leadership series, The Deeply Formed Team. Thank you so much for everyone who's been participating in part one and part two. And today we have part three, discussing psychological safety. So just as a small recap, part one in developing the deeply formed team was starting out with a vision and being able to know the true north and the direction that you want your team to take. The second is knowing the mix of that team. Who's on the team? What are their competencies? What are their capabilities? And really being intentional around knowing where the team complements one another. And last is this idea of psychological safety. And I know this word has kind of been thrown around a lot, but we're going to go deeper today around psychological safety. And I have a partner in crime with me today. I'm so excited. My dear, dear friend, my old boss, been a friend for 20 years, Chris Powell, who is the CEO of Talmetrics, which is a talent insights platform that really goes deeper around humanizing and collecting data. So, Chris, how are you?
Hey Yuri, I'm well. How are you, my friend?
I am well. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talk with me today.
Yuri, first of all, I'm honored to be here with you as always. And I think about in your opening, you were talking about psychological safety. This is a word that has become fairly used, sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly, and oftentimes not with the deep understanding of what it actually is. And so I'm excited for us to get a little geeky, get a little wonky on this, and go a little deeper on this. As I say, go beyond the crack in the sidewalk on this one. So, um, so psychological safety is a concept of that it's an experience and a concept. It could be researched and all of these, but it's a lived experience that when an individual is able to freely speak up, offer their new ideas, challenge the status quo, be able to learn without risk. Those are some of the broad things, and I call it an experience because you will know if you have psychological safety through the experiences you have. And then on our end, as a researcher and an insights partner, we can measure that to give an organization or a team indication of how psychologically safe is it for the very team members to show up and contribute and to have impact.
That's right. I'd love for you to just kind of walk us through these four stages of psychological safety. Again, it's really intentional. I think sometimes people just use the words, but don't realize that these are progressive experiences that leaders have to create.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I love how you just framed it as progressive experiences and accretive, right? So if all four of these are to happening at the same time, winner, chicken dinner, we are here for it, right? I don't think many people would say, I don't want this.
Exactly.
Or in a team, right? And so let's talk about these four here, right? And so let's start at the level one of psychological safety is around inclusion safety. Do I feel included and accepted as my authentic self? Now, some of us may challenge and say our authentic self may need some parts of that may need to be left at home. But however, do I feel like I could be accepted for myself, right? And we know research shows that when employees feel like they belong, their level of engagement, and we're going to talk about that word too, because this is all in service of driving the engagement, and we'll circle back to that. But it has a positive increase on driving engagement and significantly around performance, right? So if you feel like you can be included from a safety standpoint on a team, hey, that's step one, right?
Exactly.
And then the second step, like any of us, when we join a team, there's this whole framework around the four levels or four stages of contributions. And if you're new to a team, you've got to learn the role. And so, in your process of learning and getting to mastery in your role, there's this concept called learner safety within psychological safety. Is this a place where I can ask questions, seek feedback without fear or judgment or retaliation? Right? Is this a safe place for me to learn? Because I got to tell you, in my career every job I got, I didn't know what I was doing when I first started it. I may have had an inkling, but I didn't really know. So I need
Say less. Right? And you needed that margin for error. And if your boss didn't give you that margin for error, some people talk about, oh, yeah, you can make a mistake and, win or learn, right?
Mhm.
No, as a concept, in reality, it's really win or lose. Because if you're not able to be given that margin for error, your learner safety is diminished. And then what becomes your risk level in terms of sandbox when we're experimenting? You don't have it. It's small.
Well, Yuri, it's kind of like what I call the range of variance, right? The more room that you have to learn and take risks, guess what? You're less likely to have to be staying in a static zone of performance and expectation, which we all know life is a happening thing, and you're not always or just or never anything. There's these situational pieces. And so when you've got a broader range of learner safety, it just gives the whole organization that room of what I call grace and space.
That's right. Absolutely. So now let's talk about contributor safety.
Oh, yes. So let's talk about contributor safety. And you heard me mention just a few minutes ago about the four stages of contribution that we move through as we move into new roles and move through our level of proficiency and mastery. And contributor safety is, do I have the freedom to contribute my ideas and collaborate? One of the gifts that we come into this existence with is the gift of expression and experimentation. And so we all have ideas. And so imagine being somewhere where you've got the skills, knowledge, talent, and experience, but you're not able to bring your ideas to the table. Now you're going to start to feel kind of in this reduced effectiveness. And guess what? That's going to impact, but we're going to get back to engagement, why all of this matters. But that's contributor safety. Now, challenger safety is one of my favorites because I know when we see high levels of challenger safety in teams, we've got a team and a leader that believes in what I call adult to adult relationships. And Linda Grattan coined this in one of her books on the democratic enterprise years ago, and I just love it. We want adult to adult relationships in the workplace. And challenger safety is the personification. When that exists, that is the personification that we've got a highly functioning team that's meeting each other at that adult level to be able to challenge the status quo and suggest new ideas without people feeling like it's an attack on them personally. That is
Absolutely.
that nirvana point for me when I see that in organizations and teams.
And then it's this, so you can challenge each other safely and give each other, this space and the aperture to consider that there might be a different way of doing something. And if you don't do that, I mean, how do you have creativity? How do you, how does new stuff come into the mix that even allows you to experiment?
Think about, we just talked about the four levels, dimensions of psychological safety. And you heard me talk about this is in service to. So imagine wherever you are on the spectrum of psychological safety within your team or your organization. Hold on. That's important because that is often a key driver in being a predictor of your level of engagement, commitment, and retention to the organization. So that psychological factor, psychological safety factor is a critical factor in
That's
the
right.
overall employee experience. Because if you can't show up and feel safe, the likelihood that means you're going to feel like you've got low agency. Like there's not enough agency for me to show up in my fullness here. And then you're going to look out and say, all right, is anybody advocating? Yeah, this might be what it is, but is anybody advocating out there for me, with me, to evolve or change this? Because at some point, if you don't have that agency and that advocacy, it's going to start to impact your level of alignment with the organization, its goals, and the team's goals. And we're going to talk about teams in a minute in this concept called the collective efficacy. And then it's also going to impact the level of accountability because, like, everybody, it's called the big elephant in the room. Who's dealing with it? right? And is everybody ignoring it? So where's the level of accountability to deal with the tough stuff?
So it reminds me of this article from HBR that said that by Kara Baskin and Amy Edmondson, and they said that people who feel psychologically safer work better in teams, and they can share information and be transparent. They can be productive in their work because the conditions have been set for them to be safe. So that because uncertainty and interdependence work together, and we know that in this post-COVID environment, we're really having to learn interdependency between teams.
Yep.
That without that, there's no ability to be candid, ask for help, share mistakes, and you won't be able to get things done. Yeah. So I remember in our work together at Talmetrics, we talked about this concept of collective efficacy. Yeah. And so I'd like to go a little deeper with you, because I think that these are sort of like two parts of the same coin. Psych safety and collective efficacy really have to work together.
There was a project done at Google back in 2015 called Project Aristotle. Aristotle, I think I got that right. And it confirmed through their study that psychological safety was the number one driver for high performing teams. Now, let's talk about psychological safety's twin sister, collective efficacy. They're fraternal twins, but they go hand in hand in this work. In particular, when we're talking about deeply developing team, deeply operating, highly effective teams, psychological safety alone isn't enough. We need to have this thing called collective efficacy. And that's the shared belief that the team can execute and succeed together. And it shows teams with high collective efficacy normally will outperform those with lower levels. So not only do you have to feel safe, you also have to believe and trust that the team that you are operating in can get the job done at or above the level of expectation and accountability.
That's right. And if your collective efficacy is low and your psychological safety is low, and if you're really good and you're measuring all four stages independently, like we do at Talmetrics, because that's what's necessary, right. People might feel like they're part of the team, but do they feel like they can make a mistake? You can actually measure that, because those are two different experiences. Mm-hmm. So if you have that coupled with the idea of, does this team even believe, this deeply formed team, do they actually even believe that they can get the dang thing done?
Yeah, and so that collective efficacy component, when you unpack it, it gets into factors around trust, accountability, clarity, communication, collaboration. So there's several layers under there that we are looking at from a measurement standpoint to understand what is the factors or the components that are actually driving and creating collective efficacy. And when married with psychological safety, it starts to give us a real good indication or predictive models or linkages models where we can look at the relationship to performance, productivity, commitment, intent to stay, all of those things that as a leader of a team, you want to understand what are those push-pull factors that are happening, or those conditions and context factors that are happening in the environment that you and or the team can address so that you can drive performance, productivity, retention, commitment, blah, blah, and so forth and so forth. One of our taglines is stop guessing, start knowing.
And start knowing. That's right.
And so part of that is organizations are dynamic human systems. And you heard me mention conditions and context. They are constantly changing, which can influence psychological safety and collective efficacy and performance. And so as a leader working in this dynamic workplace that we're in, having a finger and understanding these factors gives you a competitive advantage on being able to drive higher degrees of engagement and belonging and commitment and performance than not. Leaders who care got different numbers.
And talk about intention and impact coming together. These become the elements of a deeply formed team. If you want to get this 1-2 punch of a measurement partner and an advisory partner coming together to strategically develop your deeply formed team, please give me a call.